It was just another ordinary day in Sarajevo, until two bullets tore through history. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark in the tinderbox of Europe. But why did this act, seemingly small, have such an enormous impact? The complex web of alliances, tensions, and nationalism in Europe was already set. With the murder of the Archduke, the fuse was lit, and the world would never be the same again. The assassination was just the beginning. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed in a war that no one had expected. But how did this happen so quickly? Tensions had been building for decades, and the alliances formed in the past meant that once one country went to war, others had little choice but to follow. Europe, once peaceful, was now a battleground. The stage was set, and millions would be caught in its deadly grip. The battlefield of World War I was not just in open fields, but buried deep beneath the ground. Soldiers fought in trenches, narrow ditches dug into the earth that became both their shelter and their tombs. Here, soldiers lived in misery, battling not only the enemy but the elements. The sight of mud-caked uniforms and the constant sound of gunfire became their grim reality. Trench warfare would define this war, turning the landscape into a graveyard of lost hopes. Amid the chaos and bloodshed, there was a brief moment of humanity. On Christmas Eve, soldiers from both sides put down their rifles and met in the middle of no man's land. They sang carols, exchanged gifts, and even played football. The Christmas truce of 1914 was a rare moment of peace in a war that would soon become even more brutal. It reminded us that even in the darkest times, the spirit of friendship and peace can still shine through. The Battle of the Somme was meant to be a breakthrough, a decisive moment in the war. But it turned into one of the bloodiest chapters in history. The first day of the battle alone saw an unimaginable number of casualties. Soldiers, marching across open fields toward heavily fortified positions, were cut down by machine gun fire. It was a horrific display of the human cost of war. The Somme taught the world a bitter lesson. War was not just about strategy, it was about sacrifice. World War I wasn't just a war of men and guns, it was a war of innovation. One of the most significant changes came with the introduction of the tank. Initially, tanks were clumsy and slow, but by 1917, they began to make an impact on the battlefield. At the Battle of Cambrai, tanks helped break through German lines. The future of warfare was no longer about cavalry charges or foot soldiers, it was about machines. Verdun became a symbol of suffering. Over 300,000 men lost their lives, and the battle's goal was not victory, but simply survival. The French soldiers, determined to hold their ground, were pushed to their limits. Verdun was a battle where the human spirit was tested in ways no one had imagined. It was about endurance and the willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause. World War I changed the role of women in society forever. With millions of men away at the front, women took over their jobs in factories, offices, and farms. They served as nurses, doctors, and even spies. The war gave women a chance to prove their strength and capability in ways that had not been possible before. When the war ended, the world would never be the same for women. The war had been raging for years, and it seemed as if nothing could change its course. But in 1917, the United States entered the conflict, bringing new hope to the Allied forces. The American military was fresh, strong, and eager to fight. Their involvement would be one of the key factors in turning the tide of war in favor of the Allies. The US was a latecomer, but they would prove to be the final piece in the puzzle. After 4 long years of death and destruction, the war finally ends on 11th November 1918. The armistice is signed, and for the first time in years, the guns fall silent. But the end of the fighting doesn't mean the end of the war's impact. Europe is left in ruins, and millions are dead. The world is forever changed. The peace that follows is uneasy, and many wonder if the war was truly over, or if the seeds of another conflict had already been planted. The Treaty of Versailles was supposed to bring peace, but in many ways, it sowed the seeds for another conflict. The harsh penalties imposed on Germany left the country in economic ruin and humiliation. The war's true cost wasn't just in lives, but in the peace that followed. The Treaty of Versailles didn't heal the wounds, it only made them worse. The treaty set the stage for the rise of dictators and the outbreak of World War II. World War I didn't just change the map of Europe, it changed the entire world. The empires of old crumbled, and new nations were born. But the most lasting impact was on the people. The war left scars that would take generations to heal. The sacrifices of millions would not be forgotten. And as we look back at this great conflict, we realize that the world we live in today was shaped by the events of 1914 to 1918. The echoes of the Great War continue to resonate, a reminder of the cost of conflict and the hope for peace.